So in today's video, I'm sharing affirmations and solutions for how not to take things personally so that you don't get easily triggered in your relationships. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. Have you ever noticed that when someone looks at you the wrong way or is upset, you automatically think it's about you? That's what it feels like when we're taking things personally. And this video is going to help you stop that. So when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, there's a couple of things that set us up for taking things personally. The first thing is dysfunctional families don't do well with emotions. Whether the parent has trouble controlling theirs or expressing their emotions, a child typically doesn't learn a lot about managing their own feelings. You likely had to take the emotional temperature of the room, which means scanning your environment constantly to protect yourself. And that meant you had to find out who was feeling what at all times. So you got really, really good at identifying everybody else's emotions, but not your own. So what this does is it teaches a child two very important things. One, to hyper-focus on other people's emotions because that's the only way a child can stay safe in dysfunctional families. And two, they learn to ignore their own emotions, which isn't healthy either. And often this creates a highly sensitive person. So fast forward into adulthood, that sensitivity can cause problems like taking things personally and being easily hurt in your relationships. Now in childhood, this sensitivity and hyper-focus kept you safe. So it was a coping mechanism that actually worked. But in adulthood, that has to change because taking things personally all the time in your relationships is exhausting, and I don't want that for you. So how do you not take things personally? Well, I'm going to share a recent story I had with a family member where we were getting into a disagreement, and what I realized is that I wasn't taking what they were saying personally. I didn't feel tagged or triggered in any way, and that was super exciting in my recovery, so I want to share it with you. So the first thing I did to not take things personally with this family member was I avoided making negative assumptions about their intent. Because often when we take things personally, we think the other person is either criticizing us or upset at us in some way. We think it's our fault. And that's a really tough way to be in relationship with someone, because if you always think it's your fault, you're not going to be able to communicate very well and resolve issues and to feel relaxed or close to that other person. You're always going to be on edge. So what I noticed was I was really focusing on the facts and expressing myself clearly, because I realized it was really actually okay to have a disagreement with this person. That no longer meant that something was wrong with me, and that was super exciting for me in my own recovery. I want you to focus on what's happening in that conversation. What's actually being said versus what you think they mean. Because when we assign meaning to someone else's intentions, we're usually wrong. The next thing I did was I went into that discussion with realistic expectations. I knew that most likely we were not going to reach an agreement. There was not really going to be any room for negotiating because this person tends to want it their way. So I had to change my goal in that conversation. The goal became me being heard, not me being right. And that helped me not take their behavior personally. So when they started disagreeing with me, saying that they weren't going to support me in this new decision, I didn't take it personally because I knew they were just behaving the way they always did. That wasn't about me and what I was doing in that moment. It was just about how they manage their own life. And some people need more control than others, especially if they haven't done recovery work. Another thing that I realized was we were just fundamentally different. We weren't right or wrong, we were just at an impasse. And sometimes in relationships that happens, and that's just the natural course of life. We can't necessarily always agree with someone or get our own way. So having realistic expectations was really helpful for me instead of expecting that person to be different than who they really were. Because I could have very easily taken their response to me personally, but I didn't have to do that, and you don't have to either. So the next tool for how to not take things personally is to change your self-talk, because I had to look at what I was telling myself that contributed to me taking things personally. And some of those messages were, they're going to be mad at me. I better shut up. I better not express a different opinion. I scared myself before even getting to a conversation with somebody else because I was so sure that they were going to hurt me. And realizing I could change that was huge. I could go into a conversation and say, you know what? I don't know what the other person's intention is, and that's okay. Maybe that other person has no intention to hurt me. One way to shift that message is to actually go into a conversation and say to yourself, you know what? People have good intentions. Assuming that other people don't want to hurt us is a very powerful way to change your self-talk. So another powerful way for how to not take things personally is using affirmations. And affirmations are basically self-soothing statements about yourself or the other person or the situation that will calm you down and help you not take things personally. So for instance, instead of going into a family event thinking, if that other person looks at me sideways, that means they're mad at me. Because let's face it, we don't know what's in somebody's heart. And really the whole purpose is for you to stay positive and realistic in that instance, so you're not jumping into fear. So here are a few affirmations for how to not take things personally. If somebody is upset, it's not my fault or responsibility. This is a big one because often when we take things personally, we're globbing on to somebody else and feeling responsible for what they're doing or what they're saying about us. And in truth, sometimes has nothing to do with us. Another affirmation is, I deserve to be treated with respect, or I deserve to treat myself with respect. Because sometimes we actually throw ourselves under the bus with that negative self-talk, and that also contributes to taking things personally. Another affirmation is, what somebody thinks of me is more about them and who they are than the truth about me. That's a very powerful affirmation because what somebody thinks of us is really essentially none of our business. Because when we jump into somebody else's head, we're making negative assumptions that aren't necessarily true. Now, if affirmations are difficult, I want you to add the word maybe, because that can be a really gentle way your brain can glob on to the fact that maybe I deserve to be treated better. Maybe what that other person thinks of me is none of my business. That can be a really soft way for your brain to actually accept that affirmation, because sometimes we have trouble hearing the positive about ourselves. Now, another thing you can do for how to not take things personally is put yourself in their shoes. I also did this with my family member, and it really helped because I knew their background. I grew up with this person and I knew what their struggles were. And once I started thinking about that and how hard it was for them to let go of control, I could have some empathy, because expecting that person to be in recovery and do what I'm doing is totally unrealistic. And maybe you're in the same boat. Maybe you're the only one in your family doing this work and you're wanting other people to take accountability for their behavior, but they can't because they don't have the tools yet. Having empathy for where they're at can be really helpful for not taking things personally. So the next thing I want to give you is share just a few solutions for how to not take things personally. One, I want you to remember that you can have your own perspective and it's okay to disagree. That doesn't mean that you're wrong or you're bad, because often in difficult conversations with people, we will take things personally because we will blame ourselves before we give others a chance to blame us. But it's your job to honor your own truth without making yourself or others wrong. The next thing I want you to remember is somebody else's reaction is always more about them and their own personal history and what they've gone through in their life than who you are as a person. This has helped me so many times not take things personally because everybody has their own pain, and respecting that is how I can stay serene. And the last thing I want you to remember is if somebody is upset at you, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or you actually did anything wrong. Making a mistake doesn't mean you're bad. This has been a huge lesson in my own life because every time somebody's mad at me, it did scare me. It scared me a lot because I grew up with somebody who raged. But eventually, I got to the point where I could see that if somebody's upset at me, that doesn't mean anything about my value as a person. And that's what we have to remind ourselves of, is that when somebody's upset, there can be a lot of different reasons that contribute to that. And yes, we want to look at our own behavior in that, but we also don't want to beat ourselves up and take that to mean that something's wrong with us. So the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go watch my video on how to validate yourself, because that's the next step in your healing. Thanks so much.